I went to Hawaii with my parents, sister, and husband. He said he needed to go out alone, so I followed him. He entered a chapel and there she was, my sister, in a white dress next to him. She doesn't know, right? My sister said. Relax, he whispered. My mom laughed. She's too dumb to notice. I walked away in silence. When they came home, they froze at the doorstep. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I would love to know which city you are joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. Winter in Boston has a way of stealing the light from the sky long before the day is truly done. I have always found it beautiful in a melancholy sort of way. I remember that particular evening staring out of my office window on the 45th floor, watching the first snowflakes of the season begin their silent, lazy dance to the street. The city below was a glittering tapestry of lights, a brilliant man-made constellation against the deep, bruised purple of the encroaching night. My name is Bernadette. On paper, my life was the kind of success story people write articles about. I had clawed my way up the ladder on Wall Street to become a respected investment analyst, and I had recently secured a massive promotion. I was one of the few women in my division with a corner office. I had the view, the sharp-tailored pantsuits that felt like armor, and a reputation for being calm and decisive under extreme pressure. My salary was substantial, something I had worked grueling 80-hour weeks to achieve. The gentle click of my office door opening pulled me from my thoughts. It was my secretary, Brenda, a sweet young woman with bright eyes and an even brighter future. She was holding a steaming mug. Ms. Bernadette, it is almost 8 o'clock. I was making myself some tea and thought you might like 1 inch. I turned from the window, a grateful, tired smile touching my lips. Brenda, you are a lifesaver. Thank you. I took the mug, the warmth seeping into my cold hands. You should be heading home. Do not stay late on my account. I am just finishing up a few things, she said, her voice laced with the gentle concern she always showed me. But you look exhausted. Long day. The quarterly reports are always a beast, I admitted, taking a sip of the chamomile tea. But we are almost there. Well, do not forget you have a home to go to, she said with a knowing smile before quietly slipping out and closing the door behind her. Her words hung in the air. A home to go to. She was right. As I packed my leather briefcase, the weight of the documents and the expensive laptop felt heavier than usual. I was passionate about my work, I truly was. There is a unique thrill in untangling complex market data, in predicting the subtle shifts of the economy, a feeling of control and competence that I thrived on. But lately, the thrill had been fading. The long hours, the immense pressure, it was a grind. What I truly cherished, what my heart genuinely yearned for at the end of a day like this, was my home, my warm, cozy home, and the man waiting for me there. Everett, my husband. The drive home was my transition, my decompression chamber. I would navigate the dense city traffic, the radio playing some soft jazz station, and watch as the towering steel and glass skyscrapers gave way to the tree-lined streets and familiar houses of the suburbs. Each mile brought a little more peace, shedding a layer of the high-stakes analyst and revealing the woman underneath. The woman who just wanted to be home. I remember thinking as I turned onto our street that there was a warm dinner waiting for me. Everett was a wonderful cook, and he always made something special on the days I worked late. A little knot of warmth bloomed in my chest at the thought, chasing away the winter chill. That was my life, you see, a high-stakes career by day and a simple, loving home life by night. It was, I thought, with a deep sense of satisfaction, the perfect balance. I had everything a woman could possibly want. Or so I had foolishly, blindly believed. The moment I pushed open our heavy oak front door, the scent wrapped around me like a warm hug. Beef stew rich with wine and herbs. It was my absolute favorite comfort food, the meal I craved after a brutal week. The soft glow of the lamps cast a golden light on the hardwood floors, and the house was quiet except for the gentle clatter of pots from the kitchen. "I am home, Everett," I called out, my voice shedding the professional crispness of the office and softening into the easy comfort of a wife. My briefcase dropped to the floor with a heavy thud, and I kicked off my heels. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, a clean white apron tied over his work shirt, a wooden spoon in one hand. A smudge of flour was dusted on his cheek, and his smile, that slow, wonderful smile, reached his eyes. "Welcome home, Bernadette," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. He walked over, wiped his hands on his apron, and wrapped his arms around me. He smelled of spices and home. "You worked late again. You must be exhausted." "A little," I admitted, leaning my head against his shoulder, melting into his embrace. The tension in my neck and back began to dissolve instantly. "But I feel better now that I am home." Our house was our sanctuary. It was not a sprawling mansion like the ones some of my colleagues owned, filled with art they did not understand and rooms they never entered. It was a proper home, a beautiful colonial in a quiet tree-lined neighborhood that we had picked out together. I will never forget the day we found it. Everett had walked through the rooms, his eyes wide with a sort of hopeless admiration. He had looked at the price tag and then at me, a sad smile on his face. "Bernadette, it is perfect, but it is out of my league," he had said. His salary as a loan officer at a local bank was steady but modest. He could never have afforded the mortgage on a place like this. I had looked at his dear, honest face, and without a second thought, I said, "Then it is a good thing it is in my league." I took care of the massive down payment and the lion's share of the monthly payments from my salary and bonuses. When he protested, saying he felt inadequate, I had simply squeezed his hand. "It is our home, Everett," I told him. "Your name is on the deed right next to mine. That is all that matters." And I had meant it with every fiber of my being. I would have given him the world. We ate dinner at our small kitchen table, the one we had found at a flea market, and refinished ourselves one sunny weekend. Between bites of the delicious stew, I listened as he told me about his day. He had this wonderful way of spinning stories about the little things. That day, he told me about a young couple, first-time home buyers, who were so nervous their hands were shaking as they signed the mortgage papers. "You should have seen their faces, Bernadette," he said, his own face animated with the memory. When it was all done, the woman started crying and the husband just hugged her. They were so happy. It is moments like that, it makes the paperwork worth it. I loved these simple everyday conversations. They were the anchor in my often turbulent world of volatile stocks and demanding clients. He made my life feel normal, real, grounded. He made me feel safe. He was my rock, my quiet harbor in a raging sea. After dinner, we curled up on the sofa together. A single Afghan spread over our laps and we watched some silly television sitcom. His arm was around me, my head rested on his shoulder. I felt a profound sense of peace. This, I thought, was what true wealth looked like. As he was refilling my wine glass later that evening, Everett mentioned almost as an afterthought, "By the way, Jolene called today." Just the mention of her name was enough to make the cozy warmth in the room drop by a few degrees. A familiar tightness gripped my chest. Jolene was my younger sister, and our relationship was a tangled mess of love, resentment, and obligation. She was beautiful, stunningly so, the kind of woman who seemed to glide through life on a cloud of charm and effortless grace. But beneath the surface, she was adrift. She drifted from one part-time job to another, from one failed artistic pursuit to the next, all while remaining completely financially dependent on our parents, Wallace and Loretta. And since my parents' retirement fund was propped up by my constant contributions, that meant Jolene was, by extension, living on my dime. My parents had always enabled her. They had drained whatever meager college fund they had meant for both of us just to support her endless phases of self-discovery. It had been that way since we were children. I remembered one Christmas vividly. I was 12 and had been begging for a proper chemistry set. I was fascinated by science, by how things worked. Jolene, who was 10, wanted a ridiculously expensive porcelain doll from a fancy catalog. On Christmas morning, she got the doll. I got a sensible sweater and a book about women in science. A chemistry set is too dangerous, Bernadette, my father had said. And besides, this book is much more educational. Jolene was the beautiful, delicate one to be cuddled and spoiled. I was the smart, responsible one who was expected to understand. What did she want? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. I swirled the deep red wine in my glass, watching the way it clung to the sides. It is about that Hawaii trip your parents are planning, he said, settling back onto the sofa. They want all of us to go. The whole family next month. I stopped swirling. I slowly placed the glass on the coffee table. This is the first I am hearing of it. Of course, it was. They would not call me, the person with the demanding career and the checkbook, to ask if it was a good time. They would go through Jolene, the emotional center of their universe. They would go through Everett, my kind-hearted husband, who always wanted to see the best in them. Wallace and Loretta seemed to really want a vacation with the whole family, Everett said gently. He had that earnest, reasonable tone in his voice, the one I found so hard to argue with. But a bitter smile I could not contain touched my lips. A vacation with the whole family, I repeated, the words tasting like ash. Let me guess. Jolene has been feeling emotionally unstable again and needs a break. Everett had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. She has been having a tough time, Bernadette. Her entire adult life has been a tough time, Everett, I shot back. Because she has never had to face a single real consequence. I sighed, the fight going out of me. It was an old argument, an old wound. My parents adored Jolene. With me, they were strict, almost demanding. My academic scholarships, my Ivy League degree, my soaring career, they took it all for granted. They never once expressed real gratitude for the years I had been quietly paying their property taxes, for the massive wire transfers to cover their mounting medical expenses after my father's heart surgery. I was the reliable daughter, the walking automated teller machine. Jolene was the special, fragile one. I see, I said, my voice flat. And who exactly is paying for this tropical getaway? Everett shifted his gaze, looking down at his hands. Well, they did not explicitly say, but the implication was that I finished for him. I let out a long, slow breath. I knew the script by heart. For the next few days, I held my ground. I did not want to spend over $30,000 to watch my family fawn over my sister. Everett, I am in the middle of a huge portfolio review, I said over breakfast one morning. The timing is terrible. The next day, I tried another angle. I only have so much vacation time, and I was hoping we could take a trip, just the two of us, later in the year. But he was persistent in his gentle, relentless way. He did not argue or raise his voice. He just chipped away at my defenses. One evening, he came up behind me while I was standing at the kitchen counter, scrolling through work emails on my phone. He started rubbing my shoulders, his strong fingers kneading the knots of tension there. Honey, think about it, he murmured, his breath warm against my ear. Pristine beaches, my ties at sunset. A real break. You deserve this. You work so hard for everyone. He framed it as a gift to me, a reward for my diligence. It was a clever tactic. It will not be a break, Everett, I countered, not looking up from my screen. It will be a week of listening to my mother praise Jolene for breathing while my father asks me for stock tips and then ignores my advice. We will make our own fun, he promised, his hands never ceasing their soothing motion. I swear, just you and me. We can go snorkeling, find a secluded beach. It will be like a second honeymoon. He was good. He was very, very good. He knew exactly what to say, painting a picture I wanted so desperately to be real. A picture where my family was functional, where our vacation was actually relaxing. The final push came from my mother. She called me at the office. Her voice was a syrupy blend of sweetness and guilt. Bernadette, dear, Jolene is so looking forward to this trip. Her spirits have been so low, and she thinks some time with her big sister would do her a world of good. It was emotional blackmail, pure and simple, and she was a master of it. That night, defeated, I told Everett that I would do it. I sat at my desk and pulled up the resort's website. The prices were astronomical. I booked the oceanfront suite for us and 2 deluxe rooms for my parents and Jolene. As I entered my credit card information, a wave of resentment washed over me so strong it was almost dizzying. It was during that week of planning that I started noticing things, small things. I overheard Everett on the phone in the other room. The television was muted, and the house was quiet. I heard him laugh and say, "Do not worry, Jolene. I will handle Bernadette. She will come around." At the time, I thought he was just being a good mediator. Another evening, I saw a text flash on his phone screen from her. I only caught a glimpse, something about the plan. When I asked him about it, he did not even blink. He said Jolene was just asking for help planning a surprise for my parents for their anniversary, which was still 6 months away. It seemed plausible enough. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of work and my family issues were making me see shadows where there were none. He was a good husband, a good brother-in-law. He was trying to mend the fences I had long given up on. "A trip to Hawaii," I finally said to him, forcing a smile that felt like a grimace. "All right, let us do it." Everett's face lit up with a brilliant, relieved smile. "I knew you would come around. This is going to be great, Bernadette. I promise." He stood up happily and headed toward the kitchen to get us some celebratory wine. And I sat there trying to ignore the small cold knot of dread in the pit of my stomach, a silent alarm that I had chosen to ignore. The flight to Maui was exactly as I had predicted. I had used my airline miles to upgrade all of us to first class, a fact my mother mentioned loudly to the flight attendant before we even took off. "My daughter Bernadette is so successful," she said, beaming, making sure the entire cabin could hear. "She takes such good care of us." It was meant to sound like a compliment, but it felt like she was announcing the terms of our transaction. I was the bank, and they were the very satisfied customers. Jolene spent the entire 6-hour flight complaining. She complained that the first-class seat did not recline far enough, that the champagne was too warm, and that the movie selection was terrible. Everett, bless his heart, played the patient buffer, fetching her extra pillows and laughing at her miserable attempts at jokes. The resort I had booked was breathtaking, a slice of tropical luxury nestled on Wailea Beach. Palm trees swayed in a gentle breeze, and the air smelled of salt and sweet flowers. As we approached the grand open-air lobby, the receptionist greeted us with a cheerful aloha. "Reservation for the Montgomery Williams party," I said, managing a tired smile. "Welcome," the woman beamed. "We have the Ocean View Alii suite for you and 2 adjoining Ocean View deluxe rooms. It is a beautiful setup." As I handed over my heavy platinum credit card for the incidentals, I caught a glimpse of my mother, Loretta, her eyes wide as she took in the gleaming marble floors and soaring ceilings. She was smiling with a deep, smug satisfaction. It was a look I knew well. The look of someone enjoying a luxury they felt they were utterly owed. Still, I was determined to make this work. I plastered a smile on my face, telling myself that time together as a family was precious, even if I was the one funding the entire production. "Everett, could you help the bellman with the luggage?" I called out to my husband. He was standing a little way off by a large decorative fountain, deep in a hushed conversation with Jolene. They were leaning in incredibly close, their heads almost touching, the murmur of their voices completely lost in the sound of the cascading water. When they saw me approaching, they abruptly straightened up and stopped talking. A sudden, heavy, awkward silence fell between them. "What were you two whispering about?" I asked, keeping my tone light and breezy, though my internal alarms were starting to ring much louder now. "Oh, just activities," Everett answered, looking a bit flustered. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous tic I recognized. "Jolene was saying she is interested in snorkeling, and I was telling her about a good spot I read about." Jolene nodded quickly, a little too quickly. Yes, the underwater world. Is it not just wonderful? Her smile was wide, but it did not quite reach her eyes. I sensed a strange, crackling energy between them, a shared secret that hung in the humid island air, but I just nodded, pushing the feeling down. Yes, it is wonderful. After we had all settled into our magnificent, obscenely expensive rooms, we met for a late lunch at the hotel's beachside restaurant. From our seats on the terrace, the view of the brilliant blue ocean was nothing short of stunning. "This is just lovely," my mother exclaimed after her first sip of a ridiculously overpriced cocktail. "Bernadette, thank you so much for making this trip possible." I was so taken aback by this rare expression of gratitude that I was momentarily speechless. "You are welcome, Mom. Jolene really needed this break," my father, Wallace, explained, as if somehow justifying the massive expense to me. "She has been so emotionally unstable lately. This Hawaii trip should cheer her up." "That is right," Loretta agreed, patting Jolene's hand affectionately. "Jolene is a special child. She has an artistic soul. She feels things more deeply than most people. She needs special care." I could not help but frown into my water glass. They always called her special, treating her with this excessive, suffocating protection as if she were a delicate porcelain doll that would shatter if exposed to the real world. Meanwhile, my struggles, my 80-hour work weeks, my stressful corporate life, they were just expected. I was the sturdy workhorse. She was the fragile unicorn. "You agree, do you not, Everett?" Wallace asked, turning to my husband for validation. Of course, Everett answered immediately, without a single moment's hesitation. He looked at Jolene with an expression of profound sympathy. "Jolene needs time to relax and find herself." I felt a slight chill despite the warm Hawaiian sun beating down on the terrace. Since when had Everett become my sister's primary defender? Since when did he care so deeply about her finding herself? They had not been particularly close before this trip. Something felt off. Terribly off. The perfectly painted paradise around me was beginning to look like a very convincing, very expensive forgery. The next morning, we were all supposed to spend the entire day together at the beach. We had planned to rent a private cabana, order a massive seafood lunch, and maybe even try paddle boarding. We were at the sprawling breakfast buffet, piling our plates high with fresh pineapple, papaya, and macadamia nut pastries, when Everett, who had been uncharacteristically quiet all morning, suddenly stood up from the table. "I am sorry, everyone," he said, folding his linen napkin and placing it carefully on the table. He looked slightly uneasy, his eyes darting around the crowded dining room. "I just got an urgent call from the bank." I looked up at him, my fork halfway to my mouth. A piece of mango was suspended in the air. "A call from the bank. It is 7 a.m. in Boston, and you are in Hawaii." The excuse sounded flimsy, entirely illogical. "Are you not on vacation?" I asked. "Well, yes, but it is an important client issue," he said, and I noticed, with a sinking feeling, that he was not looking at me. He was looking at a point just over my shoulder. "A problem with a major business loan. It is complicated, but I need to get on a few conference calls and handle it." He cleared his throat. "It might take a few hours." He leaned down and gave my shoulder a quick, stiff squeeze. "I will be back as soon as I can. You guys go on ahead to the beach." He walked away before I could ask another question, his pace brisk and determined. After he left, a heavy, uncomfortable silence fell over the breakfast table. I finally broke it, turning to my parents. "Is that not strange? Everett's job is not like mine. He does not have international clients. I cannot imagine an emergency that would require his immediate attention during a planned vacation." "Oh, Bernadette, you are too suspicious," my mother sighed, dabbing her lips with a napkin in that delicate, theatrical way she had. "Always expecting the worst. That is your problem. You analyze everything to death." "Your mother is right," Jolene chimed in, her voice dripping with a syrupy concern. "Everett is just a responsible man. He is dedicated to his job. You should be proud of him instead of cross-examining him." Her defense of him was immediate and fierce, which was in itself incredibly suspicious. I fell silent, nodding numbly, but a seed of real, potent anxiety was taking firm root deep inside me. Their united front, their quick and aggressive dismissal of my completely valid concerns, it felt rehearsed. I excused myself from the table, saying I had forgotten my sunscreen in the room. Once I was back in the cool, air-conditioned silence of our suite, I closed the heavy wooden door and leaned against it, my heart starting to beat a little faster against my ribs. I took out my phone, my fingers feeling clumsy and thick as I looked up the main number for Everett's company, First National Bank. It took me a moment to find it in the directory. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking voice, and dialed. A cheerful automated voice answered, and I navigated the menu until I reached a human receptionist. "Good morning, First National. This is Brenda speaking. How may I help you?" "Hello, Brenda," I said, trying desperately to keep my voice casual and light, as if I were just a helpful wife. "This is Bernadette Williams, Everett Williams's wife. I have a quick question. I know he is on vacation, but he mentioned an urgent client issue with a major loan this morning, and I just wanted to see if there was a message I could pass along for him." "Mr. Williams?" Brenda paused, and I could hear the faint, rhythmic clicking of a keyboard over the line. "Let me see here. According to our records, ma'am, Mr. Williams is on a pre-approved vacation this week. I am not seeing any flags or urgent client matters assigned to him. His out-of-office message directs absolutely everything to his supervisor." The air left my lungs in a silent whoosh. "So, there are no emergencies?" "No, ma'am. Not that I am aware of. Everything looks completely quiet on his end. Can I help you with anything else?" "No," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "That is all. Thank you." I hung up the phone. I stood there in the middle of the luxurious hotel room, the phone feeling like a cold, heavy stone in my hand. He had lied. It was not a suspicion anymore. It was a cold, hard fact. Everett had looked me directly in the eye across the breakfast table and told me a bold, deliberate lie. The question was not just why. It was where was he, and what, or who, was he doing that required such an elaborate deception? By lunchtime, Everett still had not returned. I sat on the terrace with my family, trying my hardest to pretend everything was normal, trying to hide the fact that I was being eaten alive from the inside out. I picked at a ridiculously expensive Cobb salad, the vibrant colors of the tomatoes and avocado mocking the gray storm brewing inside my mind. My parents and Jolene were chatting happily, laughing about some memory from a past vacation, acting as if Everett's prolonged absence did not concern them in the slightest. Their nonchalance was a bright, flashing warning sign. It was not normal. A normal, loving family would be concerned that a husband disappeared on vacation. A normal family would be asking questions. Theirs was an act, and they were terrible actors. Suddenly, a cheerful notification chime came from Jolene's beach bag, which was slung casually over the back of her chair. "Jolene, that is your phone," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. She jumped as if she had been physically startled, then hurriedly reached into her bag and pulled out the device. For a split second, as she angled the screen to read the incoming message, my eyes, trained by years on Wall Street to scan complex data in milliseconds, caught the preview on the lock screen. "All set for today. Cannot wait." The sender's name was just one single letter, G. My blood ran completely cold. It felt exactly like a bucket of ice water had been dumped over my head. Jolene quickly clutched the phone to her chest, her cheeks flushing a deep, guilty red. "It is nothing," she said defensively, her eyes flicking nervously toward me and then away. "Just some travel consultation." I held her gaze, keeping my facial expression a perfect, impenetrable mask of calm curiosity. "From whom?" Just a tour guide, she stammered, that red blush deepening on her cheeks until she looked feverish. He is looking into some options for us for an excursion. I nodded slowly, quietly. I did not push her. I did not call her out on the obvious lie. I did not want to show my hand yet. But inside me, a hurricane was beginning to rage. G was almost certainly Everett. And what preparations were they referring to? What options? It was all there right in front of me. The whispers by the fountain, the blatant lies about work, the secret text messages. They were not just little cracks in the facade anymore. The entire foundation of my life, my marriage, my supposedly loving family, was crumbling into dust right before my eyes. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my iced tea. The cold glass was a stark contrast to the burning heat rising in my chest. Then I looked at my mother. Then I looked at my father. Then I looked at my sister. Their faces were absolute studies in feigned innocence. And in that moment, I knew with a bone-deep certainty. They were all in on it. Whatever sick game this was, they knew. They were his accomplices. I leaned back in my chair, the picture of serene calm. My analyst brain, the cold, calculating part of me that stayed perfectly cool under immense pressure during market crashes, was taking over. Emotion was a liability right now. I needed data. I needed concrete proof. You know, I said, my voice dangerously quiet, a stark and chilling contrast to the cheerful chatter around us on the terrace. If Everett says he is going out alone again tomorrow, I am going to follow him. My mother, Loretta, gasped dramatically, placing a heavily ringed hand over her chest. Bernadette. What a terrible thing to say. Following your own husband. That is insane. A marriage is built on trust. Your mother is right, Bernadette, Jolene said, her voice as smooth and persuasive as a serpent. You are just being paranoid. You are letting your high-stress job get to you. You need to relax. But it was not paranoia. It was intuition. It was a gut feeling so strong it was a physical, undeniable certainty. Something was fundamentally, deeply wrong, and I was going to find out exactly what it was. If there is nothing to hide, I said, my eyes locking onto Jolene's, a silent, deadly challenge passing between us, then there is no problem, is there? She looked away first. The morning sun cast a brilliant, almost tauntingly cheerful golden glow over the Maui ocean the next day, but I had not slept a single wink. I had lain there in that massive king-sized bed all night, absolutely motionless, watching the slow rise and fall of Everett's chest beside me. The face of the man I thought I knew, so peaceful in sleep, was now a stranger's mask. I spent the dark, lonely hours not in sorrow, but in meticulous planning. I was an analyst, after all, and this was going to be the most important analysis of my entire life. At breakfast, the charade continued. Everett was nervously checking his phone every few seconds, his leg bouncing erratically under the table. Sorry, he finally announced, clearing his throat loudly and deliberately avoiding my gaze. I have another work errand today. Same issue as yesterday. They need me to go sign some documents in person at an affiliate office. The lie was getting more elaborate, and much more desperate. I looked at him, my expression a completely blank canvas. What kind of errand, Everett? Well, it is complicated. A legal thing. A problem I could not resolve over the phone yesterday, he said evasively. I need to go out for a bit. I will be back by the afternoon. I promise. I glanced at my parents and Jolene. They said absolutely nothing. They just continued eating their breakfast, drizzling coconut syrup over their pancakes as if a husband abandoning his wife on a luxury vacation for 2 days in a row was the most normal thing in the world. As if they had been expecting it. Everett, I said, my voice low and steady, a clear, final warning he completely failed to heed. If you are lying to me, tell me honestly right now. He frowned, a flash of genuine irritation sparking in his eyes. He was a bad liar, and he was getting angry that I was questioning his bad lies. What are you talking about? He snapped. I am just going to deal with a work thing. Can you please drop it? My father cleared his throat loudly. A classic diversionary tactic. Bernadette, that is enough. Trust your husband. This suspicion of yours is not healthy. That is right, my mother agreed, her tone sharp and highly critical. You always expect the worst in people. That is why you cannot be happy. I closed my mouth, but my resolve hardened into a diamond-sharp point. I nodded silently and finished my coffee. After Everett kissed me goodbye, a quick, dry peck on the cheek that felt like a brush of cold, dead air, and left the restaurant, I waited exactly 10 minutes. Then I stood up. I am going to do some shopping at the Whalers' Village, I announced to my parents. They looked visibly relieved. Oh, that is a lovely idea. Have fun, dear, my father said. Jolene forced an unnatural, tight smile. Hope you find some nice souvenirs. I went back to my room, but I did not grab my shopping tote. Instead, I put on a large pair of dark designer sunglasses and a wide-brimmed sun hat I had bought at the hotel gift shop the day before. A disguise. It felt absurd, like something out of a cheap spy movie, but I was absolutely determined not to be seen. By the time I left the hotel lobby, moving quickly but carefully, I could still see Everett's figure in the distance. He was walking quickly down the beach road, heading straight toward a taxi stand. I ducked behind a large, ornate potted palm tree, my heart hammering furiously against my ribs, and waited for him to get into a cab. As his taxi pulled away from the curb, I stepped out from my hiding spot and quickly flagged down the next one in line. I slid into the back seat, the hot vinyl sticking instantly to the back of my legs. My voice was clipped and highly urgent. See that taxi up ahead? The yellow one. Please follow that car. The driver, an older Hawaiian man with a beautifully weathered face and kind, knowing eyes, raised a single eyebrow as he looked at me in the rearview mirror. Playing detective, ma'am? Is that a problem? I responded coldly, my patience worn incredibly thin. Not at all. He shrugged, his demeanor easy and calm as he expertly pulled out into the island traffic. Not uncommon in Hawaii. It is a romantic place. All sorts of drama happens. You just tell me where to go. We followed Everett's taxi for about 20 tense minutes, heading north, far away from the glittering, manicured resorts and into a quieter, much more local part of the island. The scenery outside the window changed from pristine, green golf courses to a charming jumble of small houses and lush, untamed tropical greenery. Finally, Everett's taxi pulled over in front of a small, incredibly quaint white church. It was perched perfectly on a small hill overlooking the sparkling blue ocean. A simple, hand-carved wooden sign near the road read, McKenna Chapel. Please wait here, I told the driver, my hands shaking slightly as I handed him a thick wad of cash that was more than enough for the fare and his waiting time. I will not be long. I got out of the car, my legs feeling completely unsteady, like they were made of jelly. I hid behind a thicket of bright flowering hibiscus bushes directly across the street and watched. I watched as Everett, the man I had vowed to spend my life with, stopped on the steps. I watched him adjust the collar of his crisp shirt, run a nervous hand through his hair, walk up the remaining steps, and disappear inside the chapel doors. My breath caught painfully in my throat. This was it. This was the moment of absolute truth. When he was gone from sight, I took a deep, shuddering breath, filling my lungs, and crossed the street. The air around the chapel was thick with the sweet, almost sickeningly intense scent of plumeria. It was a fragrance I knew, with absolute certainty in that exact moment, I would fiercely hate for the rest of my natural life. My heart was pounding so hard against my chest I could feel the frantic pulse echoing loudly in my ears, a terrifying drumbeat of impending dread and discovery. I crept along the side of the pristine white church building, my movements slow and highly deliberate, like a predator silently stalking its prey. I carefully peered through one of the stained glass windows. The colored glass distorted the view slightly, but I could clearly make out the shapes of people inside. A small, intimate gathering. My hands were shaking so violently now that I had to tightly clasp them together to steady them. I moved along the wall and found a small side door. It was slightly ajar, probably left open to catch the cooling ocean breeze. Taking one last, ragged breath to completely steel my nerves, I quietly slipped inside the building, pressing my body hard into the cool, dark shadows of the entryway. And the sight that immediately met my eyes stopped my breath, completely stopped my heart, and shattered my entire world into a million, irreparable, jagged pieces. There, standing before the altar, bathed in the soft, multicolored light filtering through the stained glass window behind them, was Jolene, my sister. She was dressed in a beautiful, simple white wedding gown that clung perfectly to her figure. The fabric looked expensive, draped elegantly across her shoulders. Her blonde hair was woven with small, delicate white flowers, catching the afternoon light. And standing right next to her, dressed in a crisp, perfectly tailored black tuxedo, was Everett. My husband. They were holding hands, smiling deeply into each other's eyes, completely lost in a world of their own making, as a man who appeared to be a local minister read from a thick leather-bound book. I could not breathe. I physically could not draw air into my lungs. My eyes frantically scanned the rest of the small room, desperately hoping this was a hallucination, a stress-induced nightmare. But it was not. Sitting in the very front pew, beaming with an almost beatific pride, were my parents. My mother, Loretta, was actually dabbing a tear of joy from the corner of her eye with a pristine lace handkerchief. She wore a soft pink dress, looking every bit the proud mother of the bride. My father, Wallace, sat right beside her, his arm draped over the back of the pew. He looked on with a contented, relaxed smile, acting as if this twisted, grotesque ceremony was the happiest day of his entire life. I shrank back against the cold stone wall, keeping myself hidden in the dim, dusty light of the entryway. A massive wave of dizziness washed over me, a physical blow to my system, and I had to press my palm flat against the rough wall just to steady my trembling legs. I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, praying to wake up. When I opened them, the nightmare was still playing out. I leaned forward, just enough to catch the voices carried on the quiet, sacred air of the chapel. She does not know, right? It was Jolena's voice, anxious and high-pitched, a childish whisper that instantly grated on my nerves. She looked up at Everett, her eyes wide with a pathetic, manufactured innocence. "Do not worry, relax," Everett answered, gently squeezing both of her hands in his. His voice was a low, soothing murmur that I knew so intimately well. It was the exact same voice that had told me he loved me 1,000 times. The voice that had promised to cherish me in sickness and in health in front of our own family and friends. She does not suspect a single thing. I covered my tracks perfectly. My mother laughed from the front row. It was a short, sharp, ugly sound that completely desecrated the holy space of the chapel. "She is too dumb to notice," Loretta sneered, not even bothering to keep her voice down. "Bernadetta's head is always full of work and numbers. She cannot even begin to imagine our clever little plan. She is too busy paying for this whole trip to realize what is happening right under her nose. If you have made it this far, please do me a favor, like the video and comment number 1 down below. It lets me know how awesome you are and shows that you are right here with me on this journey. Your support is a massive encouragement and truly motivates me. Drop that one so I can recognize you, and now, let us get back to my story." "What exactly happens after the wedding?" my father, Wallace, asked, his voice entirely practical, sounding like a businessman discussing a corporate merger. Everett turned his head slightly. His voice turned cold, calculating, completely stripped of any warmth. It was the voice of a ruthless analyst, not a loving husband. It was a terrifying tone I had never heard from him before. "First, I will ask for a divorce as soon as we get back to Boston," Everett said flatly. "I will play the absolute victim. I will tell everyone that we have grown apart, that her demanding career always came first and she neglected me. Her professional pride is so incredibly high, she will give in without a messy public fight just to make the whole scandal go away quietly. Our prenuptial agreement is incredibly weak. My lawyer looked at it years ago. We will get at least half of Bernadetta's liquid assets. Her investment portfolio alone is worth over $8 million. And then we will move to New York, Jolene added, bouncing slightly on her heels, her voice giddy with a sickening excitement. I have always wanted to live in Manhattan and go shopping on Fifth Avenue. And we will not have to worry about our old age, my mother said happily, smoothing her skirt. Bernadette will not abandon us, even after a divorce. She is far too dutiful. She has always been desperate for our approval. She will feel guilty and keep paying the mortgage on our house. We will be completely secure. When your remarriage to Jolene becomes public knowledge, it will completely damage Bernadetta's pristine reputation at her conservative investment firm, my father added, a deep, cruel satisfaction echoing in his voice. A massive scandal like that, being cheated on with her own flesh and blood sister. She will be completely humiliated. She will not be able to resist our financial demands. We hold all the cards. My entire body was trembling uncontrollably, shaking with a violent, silent earthquake of pure adrenaline. I pressed my back against the wall, taking slow, deep breaths through my nose. The soft, wounded part of me, the loving wife and the dutiful daughter who just wanted her family to love her, died right there in that beautiful Hawaiian church. It withered away into absolute nothingness. And in its place, my analyst brain, the part of me that absolutely thrives in a crisis, completely took over. Emotion was a severe liability right now. I needed hard data. I needed leverage. I slowly, carefully raised my smartphone from my leather purse. My movements were incredibly fluid, completely silent. I hit record on the voice memo application. Then, I switched to the video camera, and through a small gap between a marble statue and a wooden pillar, I began to film them. I zoomed in directly on their smiling, treacherous faces as they exchanged vows they had absolutely no legal or moral right to make. What do you think Bernadette is doing right now? Jolene asked with a malicious, high-pitched little giggle, adjusting her veil. Everett shrugged his broad shoulders, a sickening smirk playing on his lips. Probably sitting idly by the hotel pool, frantically worrying about my fake work emergency. She thinks she is so incredibly smart, but she is actually so easy to fool. That is exactly why I married her. For her massive salary and her eventual inheritance from her wealthy grandparents. She was never a partner. She was a long-term investment. And now it is finally time for that investment to pay out, my father chuckled darkly. A cold, pure rage, entirely unlike anything I had ever felt in my 35 years of life, spread rapidly through my heart, instantly icing over the white-hot pain of the betrayal. But not a single emotion showed on my face. My mind was already whirring, rapidly calculating, meticulously planning my very next move. They had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with. They thought I was a walking checkbook, a naive fool they could bleed dry. They were about to learn a very brutal lesson in economics. I stayed hidden in the shadows for 5 more agonizing minutes. My phone was held as steady as a seasoned surgeon's hand. I captured every single fake vow, every disgusting lie. I filmed them eagerly exchanging the simple gold wedding bands they had probably bought using my own credit card. I filmed them sharing a passionate kiss at the altar, a grotesque, stomach-turning parody of a sacred moment. I filmed my parents, Wallace and Loretta, standing up and applauding wildly with fake tears shining in their eyes. Once I was absolutely certain I had gathered more than enough evidence, undeniable, irrefutable, legally damning proof of their massive conspiracy, I quietly slipped back out the heavy wooden side door. The sweet, cloying scent of the plumeria flowers hit me again like a physical blow, and I felt a sudden, violent wave of nausea wash over me. I swallowed hard, forcing it down. I walked down the stone steps, making sure my steps were even and perfectly measured, and I crossed the busy street. The older taxi driver saw me coming and immediately started the engine. I got into the back seat and pulled the door shut with a soft, decisive click. Please take me directly back to the hotel, I said. My voice was calm, eerily calm. Are you all right, ma'am? The driver asked, his kind, weathered eyes looking at me in the rearview mirror with genuine, deep concern. You look incredibly pale, like you have just seen a ghost. Yes, I replied, my voice completely devoid of any tremor, any hint of the absolute cataclysm that had just occurred inside that building. I am perfectly fine. I just need to make some significant changes to my life plans. He nodded slowly, sensing he absolutely should not ask any more questions. We drove the rest of the way down the coast in complete silence. In my mind, the excruciating hurt was already crystallizing, rapidly transforming into a weapon. Something hard and sharp and immensely powerful was being born. They thought I was a complete fool. They thought I was a giant piggy bank. They assumed I would crumble, cry, and beg for them to love me. They had drastically underestimated me. They had no idea that the exact same mind that could accurately predict the rapid rise and fall of global stock markets could also flawlessly orchestrate a downfall of a very different, very personal kind. They had just made the absolute worst investment of their miserable lives, and I was about to make them pay in full, with exorbitant interest. Back at the luxury hotel, I walked purposefully through the opulent, open-air lobby, my posture absolutely perfect, my expression completely serene. I nodded politely at the concierge who greeted me warmly by name. I rode the glass elevator all the way up to our VIP floor, catching my reflection in the glass. I looked like a pale, determined ghost. I entered our massive oceanfront suite and locked the heavy door behind me with a loud, decisive click. For a long moment, I just stood there in the marble entryway, the silence of the large room pressing in heavily on me. I slowly walked over and looked at the giant king-sized bed with its pristine, unwrinkled white sheets. The bed I had shared with that complete monster. I saw his casual clothes spilling out of his open leather suitcase on the wooden luggage rack, including a gaudy Hawaiian shirt he had bought just yesterday using my money, and I felt absolutely nothing. The searing pain was a distant, buzzing hum, completely overridden by a cold, clear, laser-focused sense of purpose. The time for tears and heartbreak would come later. Maybe. But right now, it was time for swift, brutal action. I walked over to the sleek glass desk, sat down in the ergonomic chair, and opened my laptop. My fingers flew rapidly across the keyboard, my movements incredibly efficient and perfectly precise. There was no hesitation. I knew exactly what needed to be done. The very first email was to my personal lawyer, Althea Vance. We had been close friends since our early college days, and she was the sharpest, most utterly ruthless divorce attorney in the entire city of Boston. She absolutely hated bullies, and she deeply despised cheats. She was perfect for this job. I typed out the subject line, urgent legal action required. Williams versus Williams. Althea. I need urgent legal advice and immediate, aggressive action. I have irrefutable video and audio evidence of my husband, Everett Williams, attempting to commit bigamy with my sister, Jolene Montgomery. I also have concrete evidence of a financial conspiracy between Everett, Jolene, and my parents, Wallace and Loretta Montgomery, to completely defraud me of my assets upon a planned divorce. Please review the attached encrypted files immediately. Prepare divorce proceedings on the most aggressively favorable terms possible. I want to leave him with absolutely nothing but the cheap clothes on his back. Also, please officially advise me on the swiftest legal method to immediately cease all financial support to my parents. I will call you from a secure, private line tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time to discuss our exact strategy. Regards, Bernadette. I quickly created a highly encrypted folder, uploaded the damning video and audio files directly from my phone, and attached it to the email. Click. Sent. The next critical email was to my private banker, a quiet, meticulously organized man named Sterling, who had brilliantly managed my massive portfolio for nearly a decade. Subject, urgent and strictly confidential. Secure all assets immediately. Sterling. Effective immediately, I need you to execute the following financial maneuvers. First, aggressively move all assets, stocks, bonds, and liquid cash currently held in my name or in any joint accounts into entirely new, separate, individual accounts accessible only by me. Second, immediately freeze all joint credit cards and open lines of credit. Third, prepare all necessary documentation to initiate the immediate, fast-track sale of our primary residence in the suburbs. I have concrete reason to believe my husband is a severe, immediate financial risk. I will be sitting in your office first thing on Monday morning to sign all necessary legal paperwork. Absolute discretion is paramount. Bernadette Williams. Click. Sent. Finally, I emailed the head of human resources at my investment firm. Subject: early return from vacation. Lisa, due to a severe personal family emergency, I must return from my approved vacation earlier than planned. I have successfully booked the red-eye flight back to Boston tonight. I will be back in the office, fully resuming my normal corporate duties this coming Monday morning. Thank you for your continued understanding, Bernadette. Click. Sent. After the emails were safely dispatched, I walked into the massive walk-in closet, opened my suitcase, and began packing. I moved around the room with a mechanical, completely detached efficiency. I carefully folded only my own clothes, took only my own expensive toiletries, my finance books, and my work laptop. I did not touch a single one of his things. I saw a framed silver photo of us sitting on the nightstand, a picture taken on our first anniversary. We were smiling, looking genuinely happy. I picked it up, looked closely at the handsome face of the man I had so deeply loved, and felt a tiny flicker of something. Pity, perhaps, for the naive, trusting woman I used to be just a few hours ago. I placed the silver photo face down on the glass table with a sharp clack. As I zipped my suitcase shut, I smiled quietly in the empty room, a humorless, tight stretching of my lips. They did not know the real me at all. They only knew the incredibly generous, soft version of me I allowed them to comfortably see. The dutiful, beautiful daughter, the loving, overly generous wife. They had absolutely no concept of the calm, deeply calculating Wall Street analyst who could ruthlessly liquidate a failing, highly toxic asset without a single moment's hesitation. And that is exactly what my entire family had now become. A toxic asset. You chose the absolute wrong person to cross, I whispered to the empty, silent hotel room, turning my back on the beautiful, sprawling Maui ocean visible from the large window. I rolled my luggage down to the lobby and left a short, handwritten note at the front desk addressed to my family. Had to leave early for an urgent, high-stakes business emergency. Enjoy the rest of your vacation. That was it. Just that incredibly cold, simple, entirely plausible message. Let them have their twisted little honeymoon on my dime for a few more days. The real world, the harsh, unforgiving real world, would be waiting for them the second they got back. The long red-eye flight back to Boston was a strange, surreal bubble of suspended time. While the other first-class passengers slept soundly or watched movies under warm blankets, I sat upright with a yellow legal pad and a pen, my laptop open and glowing on the tray table. I did not rest for a single minute. I stared out the small window at the endless, inky black sea of clouds and actively hardened my heart, meticulously formulating every single step of my multi-pronged attack. This was not just going to be an emotional retaliation. This was a highly strategic, corporate-level takedown. And I would leave absolutely no stone unturned. Upon arriving at my large, empty house in the freezing Boston suburbs, I did not even pause to sleep. I quickly showered, washing the smell of Hawaii off my skin, changed into one of my sharpest, most formidable dark blue business suits, and drove straight to Althea Vance's law office downtown. She was already waiting for me. A thick file was open on her large oak desk, and a look of absolute, cold fury blazed in her dark eyes. "Bernadette, I have reviewed the files you sent," she said, her voice tight and trembling slightly with anger on my behalf. "I have been doing this exact job for 20 years, and I truly thought I had seen everything. This is monstrous. This is not just simple infidelity. This is a highly calculated, legally premeditated conspiracy to commit massive financial fraud. We can absolutely annihilate him. Good, I said calmly, taking the comfortable leather seat opposite her desk. That is exactly the plan. Complete annihilation. What are our very first steps? We need to maintain full custody of my financial portfolios. For the next 2 solid hours, we aggressively mapped out the legal strategy on a large white whiteboard mounted in her office. We intensely discussed hidden assets, stock options, property deeds, and obscure legal precedents. Althea was truly brilliant, enthusiastically suggesting punitive avenues I had not even considered. Your prenuptial agreement is incredibly weak, just as he confidently said, she confirmed, tapping the whiteboard with a marker. But his highly fraudulent behavior and the documented attempted bigamy render that contract almost completely irrelevant. We can easily argue for a completely inequitable distribution of assets based entirely on his egregious, borderline criminal conduct. Next, I drove straight to the bank and executed the strict instructions I had given my banker, Sterling. I spent a full hour sitting in his plush office, signing document after document. Access to all joint checking and savings accounts was immediately and permanently severed. My substantial assets, my massive salary deposits, my entire financial world was swiftly moved into a complex series of blind trusts and new, highly secure accounts. It was an impenetrable fortress that Everett and my greedy family would never be able to touch. The ultimate price for trying to completely ruin my life would be incredibly high. Then came the moving company. I met them back at the house that very same afternoon. They were a highly efficient team of 4 strong, silent men. My instructions to them were incredibly simple and direct. Take the framed photos, the expensive furniture, the entire modern art collection, I told their burly foreman, pointing around the large living room. Take the imported rugs, the designer lamps, the high-end kitchen appliances. Take absolutely everything that was purchased in the last 3 years. I have all the receipts to prove I paid for it all. Which was, of course, almost everything in the massive house. Leave only the cheap items that Mr. Williams brought into this marriage himself. The foreman, a large, intimidating man with surprisingly gentle eyes, looked at my hard face with a flicker of deep understanding and unspoken sympathy. Yes, ma'am, he said quietly, getting right to work. For the next 5 agonizingly slow hours, I stood there and watched as my entire married life was unceremoniously wrapped in thick gray blankets, shoved roughly into brown cardboard boxes, and loaded onto a massive truck. The large house grew more and more cavernous by the hour, the loud echoes of the movers' heavy footsteps growing increasingly louder in the empty rooms. When they were finally done, almost absolutely nothing was left. A cheap, sagging reading lamp stood sadly by his empty side of the bed. A worn-out, incredibly ugly plaid armchair he had dragged from his old bachelor apartment sat alone in the living room. A small cardboard box of his old paperback books was left in the corner. That was it. That was his entire miserable contribution to our supposedly shared home. After the heavy moving truck finally drove away, I walked slowly through the hollow, entirely silent rooms. I went out to the garage and found a fresh can of bright red spray paint I had intentionally bought on the drive back from the airport. I walked into the empty living room. On the large, freshly painted white wall, right where our ridiculously large, expensive wedding portrait used to hang, I pressed the nozzle and wrote just one single word in big, angry, dripping red letters. Liars. The loud hiss of the can and the acrid, toxic smell of the fresh paint in the enclosed room felt strangely, deeply satisfying. It was a primal, gut-wrenching scream made entirely visible. Finally, I sat down at the now completely bare kitchen island and took out a thick, locked file I had kept safely hidden in a bank safe deposit box for years. It was my ultimate insurance policy, the one terrible thing I had desperately prayed I would never actually have to use. My parents, Wallace and Loretta, for all their endless, exhausting posturing about their pristine social reputation in their affluent community, had a massive closet full of dark skeletons. There was my father's long-term, messy affair with a younger woman from his old corporate office. There was my mother's disgusting habit of secretly mismanaging and skimming funds from the local children's charity she proudly ran. And there was their long, documented history of highly creative, entirely illegal tax evasion. I had the original emails, the forged bank documents, the undeniable proof. I had kept their filthy secrets completely hidden out of a deeply misguided, foolish sense of family loyalty. That misguided loyalty was now completely dead and buried. Just as they did not care at all about ruining my reputation, I said aloud to the cold, empty house, my voice echoing off the bare walls, I will not care about utterly destroying theirs. I meticulously compiled absolutely everything into a neat, legally damning file. The very next day, I signed the final listing papers with a highly aggressive real estate agent to put the house on the market for a quick, cash-only sale. I want to be completely free from this toxic place of betrayal as soon as humanly possible, I told her, my voice brooking no argument. When all the meticulous legal and financial preparations were finally complete, I moved my few essential belongings into a new, sleek, and fiercely private luxury apartment downtown that I had already signed a long-term lease on. I told absolutely no one my new address. I completely, ruthlessly erased my traces from my old, pathetic life. And then, I waited. I waited patiently for the exact day the happy, scheming couple and their personal cheering section would finally return from their tropical paradise. That highly anticipated day, I was sitting comfortably at work. I was in the middle of a high-level corporate meeting, confidently discussing complex market projections with the senior partners, my professional focus absolute. I felt a quiet, powerful hum of complete control, a dominant feeling that had been sorely missing from my chaotic personal life for far too long. I had explicitly instructed my lawyer, Althea, to text me the exact moment the traders arrived at the property. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, my phone buzzed silently on the polished mahogany conference table. I casually glanced down at the screen. They are here. The show is about to officially begin. I took a slow, deliberate sip of ice water. A small, incredibly cold smile touched my lips, and then I seamlessly refocused on the financial presentation, my heart beating with a steady, victorious rhythm. According to Althea, this is exactly what happened next. When Everett, Jolene, and my parents, all deeply tanned and laughing loudly from their extended Hawaiian vacation, pulled their rental car up to the house, the very first glaring sign that something was horribly wrong was the massive for sale sign aggressively staked into the front lawn. Not just any standard sign, but one with a large, bright red sale pending banner proudly slapped across it. Their boisterous laughter instantly died in their throats. Deeply confused and suddenly panicked, they hastily used Everett U.S. key to open the heavy front door. The very first thing their eyes saw was the cavernous, entirely empty foyer, stripped of the expensive rugs and console table. Then, they saw the single, furious red word screaming violently at them from the far living room wall. Liars. Cautiously, moving slowly as if they were entering a dangerous haunted house, they proceeded into the empty, echoing living room. The loud click-clack of their suitcases bouncing off the bare hardwood floors filled the absolute silence. In the absolute, dead center of the vast, barren floor, a single heavy wooden folding table remained, looking like a tiny island in a vast sea of complete emptiness. On that table, thick divorce papers and a massive stack of complex financial documents were meticulously arranged in a neat, highly orderly pile. And standing right beside the table, dressed impeccably in an expensive, sharply tailored dark gray suit, her arms crossed and her expression cold and entirely impassive, was Althea Vance. What in the world is happening? What is this? Where is Bernadette? Everett asked, his voice shaking, a pathetic mixture of deep confusion and rising panic. Althea calmly explained, her sharp, precise voice easily cutting through the stunned, heavy silence of the room. Miss Bernadette Montgomery knows absolutely everything, she said, deliberately and aggressively using my maiden name to show him he was already cut out. Including your disgusting little ceremony in Hawaii. She slowly held up a digital tablet, her movements completely unhurried and deliberately torturous. She pressed play. The high-definition video I had taken from the shadows in the chapel instantly filled the screen. The crystal-clear audio of their treacherous, fake vows and their disgusting conspiratorial whispers about my money echoed unnervingly loudly in the completely empty house. All the Hawaiian color violently drained from Jolina's face. She staggered backward, looking like she was going to be physically sick right there on the floor. My parents, Wallace and Loretta, were utterly speechless, their mouths hanging wide open in sheer, unadulterated disbelief as they watched themselves applauding a crime. "Where is she?" Everett asked frantically, his voice cracking horribly, the smugness completely wiped from his face. "I need to talk to her right now." "This is a massive misunderstanding." "There is absolutely no misunderstanding," Althea retorted coldly, pausing the damning video on a frame of Everett kissing Jolene. "And you no longer have the privilege of speaking with Ms. Montgomery. She has officially instructed me to handle all legal communication from this point forward. She will not be returning to your pathetic lives. This right here is your final encounter." She gestured sharply to the massive pile of documents sitting on the table. "These are the official divorce papers. Ms. Montgomery is aggressively filing on the absolute grounds of adultery and premeditated financial fraud. On the table, you will also find certified bank statements clearly showing that all joint accounts have been permanently closed and all of Ms. Montgomery's personal assets have been legally and securely secured. You cannot touch a single dime. This is a legitimate, legally airtight, and immediate response to your highly fraudulent acts." She then turned her freezing, cool gaze directly to my horrified parents, Wallace and Loretta. "You will also find legal documents here formally and permanently ceasing all financial support. Ms. Montgomery will absolutely no longer be paying your monthly mortgage, your mounting medical bills, or supplementing your lavish income. That generous assistance has now ended permanently." She let that terrifying reality sink into their brains before continuing her assault. "Furthermore, strict arrangements have been completely finalized for certain highly sensitive information regarding your hidden, massive debts and your highly questionable, illegal economic activities to become completely public within your affluent community should you attempt to contest any of this in court. I have a file right here," she said, sharply tapping a thick, heavy manila folder on the table. "Detailing your gross improprieties with the Children's Charity Fund and your long, documented history of federal tax evasion. It is fully compiled and entirely ready to be hand-delivered to the IRS and the District Attorney's office today. However, the disclosure of this incredibly damaging information," she paused, letting the heavy threat hang menacingly in the stale air, "may miraculously change depending on your full, absolute, and immediate cooperation." She then turned her attention back to the horrified, trembling newlyweds. "As for your ridiculous little marriage, it is, of course, legally invalid. Bigamy by a married person is strictly not recognized in this state. In fact," she added, her voice dropping slightly into a lethal register, "it is an illegal act that could easily be subject to severe criminal penalties, including significant jail time." The blood completely drained from Everett's face. He swayed on his feet, looking like he was about to physically collapse onto the floor. "I want to talk to Bernadette," my mother finally whimpered, her voice trembling pathetically, tears ruining her expensive makeup. "She is our daughter. She cannot possibly do this to us." "Unfortunately, she no longer thinks of you as her parents," Althea replied, completely matter-of-factly. "Let me clearly convey her exact words to you. Blood relation is a mere coincidence, but betrayal is an active choice. You made your choice. Now she is making hers." Everett finally found his voice, sputtering with a weak, incredibly pathetic anger. "I will not let her get away with this. I have legal rights. I will aggressively fight this divorce in court." "On that specific point, please carefully look at this," Althea said, producing one last, devastating document from her leather briefcase. It is an official, certified letter, a formal notice from the Human Resources Department of her company, officially copied directly to the head of compliance at your bank. An official corporate inquiry has been filed with your employer, Mr. Williams, formally reporting that there are serious, credible questions about your professional integrity, your moral character, and your potential criminal conduct regarding fraud. Your comfortable position at the bank, and indeed your entire future career in the finance industry, is now completely in severe jeopardy, Althea informed him calmly. If you choose to fight this divorce in any way whatsoever, Ms. Montgomery is fully prepared to release absolutely all of the high-definition video evidence you just saw on this tablet directly to the local media and all your professional contacts. The choice is entirely yours. As they stood there in the empty room, utterly broken, completely panicked, and totally defeated, two massive, uniformed private security guards I had specifically hired appeared silently at the open front door. Althea gestured sharply to them. These gentlemen will strictly escort you while you hastily collect any cheap personal belongings you believe are still on the premises. You have exactly 24 hours to completely vacate the property. The house is already under contract and the new owners will be taking full possession next week. Their grand, evil plan, their entire comfortable future built entirely on my hard-earned money and my shattered heart, had completely crumbled into dust in an instant. They were left with absolutely nothing but the cheap clothes on their backs and the catastrophic consequences of their own bottomless, disgusting greed and betrayal. 2 full years passed since that horrible day. The view from my new office was even more spectacular than the old one. I was now a senior vice president of a major, global investment firm located right in Manhattan, having happily accepted a highly lucrative promotion and a cross-country transfer. The iconic city skyline, a breathtaking panorama of massive ambition and glittering light, was clearly visible from the floor-to-ceiling windows of my sprawling corner office. It was a wonderful daily reminder of my brand new life, a life I had built entirely for myself, strictly on my own terms. My legal name was Bernadette Montgomery again, and it felt absolutely wonderful to hear it spoken. On my polished mahogany desk, there were beautiful framed photos of me laughing loudly with new, wonderful friends, women who were fiercely loyal, incredibly smart, and genuinely funny. On the wall, several framed certificates hung, proudly honoring my massive professional achievements. The deep pain of the past had not vanished completely overnight. It had definitely left scars. For the entire first year, I spent time with a wonderful, incredibly insightful psychological counselor once a week. We talked deeply through the agonizing years of emotional manipulation from my family, and the profound, world-shattering shock of the betrayal. She patiently helped me understand that their disgusting actions were a direct reflection of their own deep brokenness and greed, not a measure of my personal worth. She helped me slowly learn how to trust again, starting entirely with trusting myself. The intense therapy helped me grieve properly. It was honestly like attending the sad funeral of the naive woman I used to be. But that woman had to die for me to survive. True strength, I had written in my leather journal after one particularly intense session, is having the immense courage to stand up for yourself, even if you are standing completely alone. One sunny afternoon, there was a soft, polite knock on my office door. "Come in," I answered, looking up from a thick financial report. A tall man with a warm, incredibly crinkly smile and very kind eyes peeked his head into the room. "Just came to quickly confirm our lunch date before your big board meeting." Foster smiled brightly at me. He was a highly respected, tenured professor of economic history at Columbia University. A brilliant, genuinely funny, and deeply gentle man whom I had randomly met at an investment seminar over a year ago. We had started with casual coffee, which quickly turned into long dinners, which soon turned into wonderful weekends exploring the massive city together. He was now my partner, my equal. "Of course, I have not forgotten," I returned his warm smile, the gesture feeling entirely easy and completely natural. His calming presence brought a wonderful sense of peace and rock-solid stability to my life that I had absolutely never known before. He loved me for my mind, for my sharp, sarcastic wit, and for my fierce resilience. He never once asked about my massive finances or my portfolio. With him, I felt truly seen, cherished deeply for exactly who I was as a person, not for what I had in the bank. That following weekend, I hosted a lively barbecue party in the sprawling green garden of my new home in a quiet, incredibly leafy suburb just outside the city. It was not a massive, cold mansion, but it was mine, entirely paid for, filled with bright light and loud laughter and incredibly good food. Surrounding me were the amazing people I had actively chosen as my new family. My fiercely loyal friends, my deeply respected colleagues, and Foster, who stood right by my side, his warm hand resting gently and reassuringly on the small of my back. "Let us make a toast," I said loudly, raising my crystal glass of expensive champagne, the golden bubbles sparkling brightly in the late afternoon sun. "To wonderful new chapters, to beautiful chosen families, and to having the absolute courage to ruthlessly choose your own happiness." Everyone cheered loudly, their voices a warm, comforting chorus of genuine affection. As I looked around at their smiling, happy faces, I finally understood a profound, life-altering truth. True family is not about biological blood relations or shared last names. It is entirely about the real relationships you build, the ones where people deeply respect you, actively support you, and celebrate your worth unconditionally, without expecting a paycheck. Before heading out to that life-changing lunch with Foster earlier that week, I had been thoroughly cleaning out my desk drawers and had come across a small, wrinkled newspaper clipping from a tiny suburban Chicago paper. It had been sent to me months ago by an old college friend who lived out there. I did not keep it out of petty malice, but as a quiet, incredibly somber reminder of where I came from. It was not a big article, just a few short paragraphs buried in the local news section. It detailed the incredibly harsh, unforgiving reality my former family now faced on a daily basis. They had been forced to move to a dreary, freezing suburb of Chicago to desperately escape their massive shame and their aggressive creditors in Boston. Everett had never recovered professionally. The damning letter from my HR department had effectively blacklisted him. His once promising reputation in the highly tight-knit banking industry was completely destroyed. The short article mentioned he was last seen working a grueling, low-wage job as a shift manager at a giant retail big-box store. A grainy photo accompanying the text showed him wearing a cheap, ill-fitting polyester suit, his face looking incredibly tired, aged, and utterly defeated. Jolene, her once vibrant, effortless beauty now completely faded and heavily clouded by chronic fatigue and massive regret, was working incredibly long hours as a simple supermarket cashier just to make basic ends meet. "What were we even thinking then?" she had reportedly asked a former friend who had spoken to the local paper. "It was exactly like a wonderful fantasy," and then the fantasy violently ended. My parents had faced their own incredibly harsh, humiliating reality. Having lost my massive financial support, they had been forced to officially declare bankruptcy. They had to sell their beloved, expensive home at a massive loss just to cover their staggering debts. Now, they lived together in a small, cramped, government-subsidized apartment meant for the struggling elderly. Their precious social reputation had completely collapsed after their dark secrets regarding the charity and the taxes were discreetly leaked within their affluent community. All their former wealthy friends had quickly and completely distanced themselves. They were now facing a highly lonely, incredibly bitter old age, trapped entirely in a terrible prison of their own making, a prison built brick by brick with their own disgusting greed. I had not completely forgiven them. I honestly do not know if I ever will. Forgiveness is an incredibly complex thing, but the blinding anger, the burning, all-consuming rage that had heavily fueled me during those early months had finally cooled into a quiet, solid resolve. I had learned a massive, invaluable lesson from their brutal betrayal. I had become significantly stronger, much wiser, and infinitely more discerning. I had learned that you can, and you absolutely must, choose to walk through this difficult life only with people who genuinely know your deep value and actively respect it. As Foster gently squeezed my hand under the table at lunch that beautiful day, our deep conversation flowing easily from complex economic theory to exciting plans for our upcoming weekend getaway, I smiled. A real, completely genuine smile that finally reached my eyes. Blood ties are merely a biological coincidence. Real, unbreakable bonds, the ones that actually matter in this world, are a conscious choice. My incredible new life truly began the exact moment I actively chose to know my own immense worth, to fiercely demand respect, and to start building genuine, completely honest relationships. From the smoking ashes of a truly devastating betrayal, I had found not just a satisfying revenge, but something far more valuable, far more lasting, true happiness, and a deep peace I never thought possible. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. It was not an easy thing to share, and it took me a very long time to be able to tell it without feeling the sharp, burning sting of the past. But if there is one single thing I have truly learned, it is that we are all so much stronger than we think we are. If you have ever been through something similar, a painful betrayal, or if this story resonated with you in any way at all, please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories truly matter, and your strength is a massive inspiration to everyone reading. And please, do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories just like this one. It truly means the absolute world to me.